and really looking forward to watching those videos later. But anyway, who am I? My name is Steven Briggs. I am a senior program manager for power operations cybersecurity with the Tennessee Valley Authority. I've been doing cybersecurity for about 11 years. Prior to that, I spent 5 years in the U.S. Army Infantry, doing 2 tours to Iraq and a tour to Kosovo. So I got all of my physical security experience there. A lot of my foundations for my cybersecurity philosophy from the infantry, but really learned a lot and enjoyed my time in the service. And then I think it's also important to have a little bit of background about what you enjoy as a speaker. So I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, player, DM, usually lawful good. I love to golf and video games, all that fun stuff. And then I'm on the Twitters, so you can find me at Tennessee Vols Fan 29. Try and post some funny stuff, follow a lot of smart people, and enjoy the InfoSec Twitter community. And I'm also a big supporter of the Mental Health Hackers and Innocent Lives Foundation. I think that those are both 2 great charities out there doing a lot of good work for the hacker community. And then the Innocent Lives Foundation tracking down child predators and helping to expose them and work with law enforcement. Definitely a great organization, so go check both of them out. So today we're going to be talking about the government's view and organization of critical infrastructure. This is more on the strategic plan side of the house of cybersecurity. This is not a ones and zeros talk, but I think it's a very important part of security to understand, because this is, the world that your executives are planning, what they're having to deal with as far as the government relations go. And then also just talk about, the way that the government is approaching this, what cybersecurity weaknesses there are based on the individual sectors, and then really look at how critical infrastructure interdependencies are tied together to show what cybersecurity risks there are and what operational risks there are between the different verticals. So our agenda, as I said, I'm going to talk about the government's definition of critical infrastructure, talk about those interconnections and dependencies, talk about some high-level initial failure scenarios, and then talk about the cascading failure potential between them. Talk about how social disruption can factor into that. Also a little bit about the incident response differences between an IT environment and the ICS environment. What is being done already, and then what you should be doing to be ready for all of this. So this year, the U.S. Council of Foreign Relations survey ranked a highly disruptive cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure, including the electoral systems, as the highest risk for 2020. That is above a large-scale physical terrorist attack. That is above war with Russia, North Korea, or other named conflict in the world. And that, you would expect that to be, national media news, on CNN and all the other news agencies out there, that this is a big deal, and the government ranked it ranked it really high, and you would have expected, there to be, I guess, more discussion, more action. And over this year, you really haven't seen much of that. Even before COVID and everything hit, you didn't see a lot of change. So I'm going to talk about a lot of the stuff that's, I think, gone on behind the scenes, and how you should be aware of it and what you can do with it. But cyber attacks against critical infrastructure and IT infrastructure have pretty much been going on since 1982. They intensified in 2010 with the Stuxnet attack on the Iranian centrifuges. So if you're following that fun drinking game, it's once again been 0 days since Stuxnet was mentioned. But you've seen cyber attacks being used as precursors, alternatives, even to armed conflict. So we saw it in 2019 with the cyber attack against Iran to disable their ability to attack oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. You've seen across the world attacks on every US defined critical infrastructure in one way or another. And all of these cyber attacks on critical infrastructure can play a part of a conflict because they go beyond system-based cyber impacts. They cross over into that potentially causing loss of life. When you start impacting emergency services, when you impact the electric sector, when you impact the dam sector, you start getting into those impacts can kill people, and it gets serious real fast. So working for a power company, I take my mission very seriously. It's the motivation for me to get up every day and go to work, that I'm defending our infrastructure, I'm defending the Tennessee Valley, and I'm making sure that the lights stay on and everything runs the way it's supposed to be. But I also would say that, I believe that we've already had loss of lives due to ICS cyber attacks. If we attribute any deaths caused from the cyber attacks and the blackouts in Ukraine in 2015, I would probably list some of those as the first. So we just haven't seen, I guess, the world take that view of it, that cyber attacks can kill people. And it's something that we need to kind of fundamentally change our perspective on. I think we would get a lot more support for critical infrastructure defense and protection programs. But we have seen earlier this year, the Cyber Solarium Commission published about a 187-page report. And this was a group that was stood up in 2019 as a bipartisan commission of 14 members. You have some really big names in the government. You got the Deputy Director of National Intelligence, the Deputy Director of Homeland Security, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Director of the FBI. You also have Tom Fanning, the CEO of Southern Company, on this team, and some great representatives from our Congress and House of Representatives on this team that put in a lot of work really fast to deliver this report. And when I first read it, the first 2 pages, or the first 3 pages, painted this extremely grim picture about how overlapping critical infrastructure failures and attacks from cyber and physical means could really, push us to that apocalyptic end of days type of scenario. And this coming out of a congressional group really kind of surprised me. I mean, the first 2 pages really talk about commercial enterprises going bankrupt. You had water treatment plants getting hacked, so you couldn't trust the water. You had DC being flooded from hacks on the reservoir dams around there. You had delivery drones and trains being hacked and used as rockets and missiles. Refugee camps stood up out there on the Capitol lawn. I mean, it was a pretty dark picture. And I'm thinking to myself, how is this possible? How would this be possible? I mean, we've said that, things are bad for over 20 years, but we've never said how bad. And as Alyssa said in the keynote, we have to show the data to back up our responses. So we can't really know where to protect critical infrastructure if we don't know where we're all at right now. And the government, has been pushing through plans. We pushed through other directives. Every president, has had some impact on the cyberspace. And really the Solarium Commission is taking it to a next step, a next level. They're trying to develop a consensus strategy approach to defending the U.S. cyberspace against cyber attacks of significant consequence. And any attack on critical infrastructure pretty much falls into that category of having those significant consequences. So the government breaks down your critical infrastructure into 16 sectors. This was done under the Presidential Policy Directive 21. Again, all government documents are very long, so I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on them. Really just wanted to point out the key ones that set the stage and are the building blocks for how the government responds and sets up oversight and coordination, collaboration with the agencies to the private-owned entities within these verticals. But this document's mission was to strengthen the security and resilience of the national critical infrastructure by managing physical and cyber risk through collaboration and integrated efforts of the critical infrastructure communities. So these are the 16 sectors. And if you found yourself working in one of these verticals, most likely you've been working in some capacity over the COVID-19 pandemic. All of these are what the government considers the essential sectors to make everything work. They have lots of interdependencies between each other, which we'll get into in a minute. But even the way that the government approaches critical infrastructure, not all of these are treated the same. You have the energy sector and the nuclear generation sector that are heavily regulated, while the majority of other critical infrastructure have little to no cybersecurity regulated requirements. And if any of these sectors are attacked, depending on how, they could have just as devastating impacts on Americans' lives. And most of these sectors, the government is trying to approach it through a voluntary adoption and establishment of the critical infrastructures to protect their systems. And we can't expect them to all protect them to the same level or even at all, because it's voluntary. If it's not a cost benefit for these privately owned companies, then most likely they're not going to do it. So that's, again, what I think going back to what Alyssa talked about. I really loved her keynote. It was amazing. You know, you have to establish, you know, the business benefit for everything that you're trying to do, and the government has to do the same. So going into the next document, you have the National Infrastructure Protection Plan of 2013. This laid out a lot of the government agency oversight for who was responsible for what sector. The majority of the responsibility falls to the Department of Homeland Security. So they're responsible for things like the chemical sector, commercial facilities, communications, critical manufacturing. But then you also get into some other groups. So like DOE, Department of Energy, has oversight over the energy sector. Department of Treasury has oversight over the financial sector. Department of Agriculture and Health and Human Services are over the food and agriculture sector. So each different vertical, even within the Department of Homeland Security, you might be interacting with an entirely different department and say, you know, the information technology compared to the nuclear reactor group, both under DHS, both are probably not talking to the same people. So the problem with this model is that by separating the sectors, there's little research and planning done on the interconnected issues between the sector. Even critical infrastructures that are under one agency, as I said, are probably managed by separate departments. Additionally, these sectors have limited regulated requirements. They have a lot of safety and operations requirements. So you have the Environmental Protection Agency putting out, you know, rules and regulations to protect the environment. You have healthcare that has HIPAA. We'll talk a little bit more about the breakdown of regulations. But overall, you don't have a lot saying specifically, these are the cybersecurity controls as a critical infrastructure provider that you should have. And that is what I think is a leading cause of causing a lot of problems and a lot of insecurities, because every report, every news broadcast, every article that I've ever seen has never once said critical infrastructure is safe, everything's great, we're going to have rainbows and kittens and puppies, and it's going to be a great day today, tomorrow, and next day. And you got nothing to worry about. Whenever that report comes out, then I'll retire because I won't have a job anymore. But I know that report's never going to come. We can say that critical infrastructure is vulnerable, you know, now until infinity. It's just how vulnerable is the argument and the discussion that we really need to have. So when we look at each sector, you can put them at the middle and show everybody depends on the IT sector. The IT sector is all of your organizations and companies that are producing hardware, software, information technology, systems and services. But then you take the internet, which the government pushes over to the communication sector, which I don't see how that works, because you can't have the internet without the systems and services behind it to make it work, which I would assume would have all been in the IT sector. So that's where you start getting, you know, different groups and different departments and different things are going to give different rules. So there's not a clear division of oversight from what you would have expected. For example, if we look at like a cloud service in the IT sector, is this in IT or is this in communications? Both of these in all of the sectors have individual plans, but most of them haven't been updated in a few years. The communications one hasn't been updated since 2015, and the IT one hasn't really been updated since 2016. Both of these are really before the big boom of like cloud services, Internet of Things, all the new shiny stuff that keeps coming out daily. So as these plans become stagnant, you know, they start losing a lot of that, you know, oversight and establishment of who's responsible for what. And new things are just going to keep coming out. But it's even better, instead of trying to put one sector at the middle, but to look at all the sectors. If you have starting to have impacts on one, you can have impacts on all. And all of us depend on each other's sectors. The electric sector depends on emergency services. If we have a fire, you know, at one of our sites, you know, we have a fire brigade, and a lot of utilities have fire brigades, but that's only a limited capacity. We're still going to be calling emergency services to come help with that. And if their, you know, dispatch center or whatever is not able to pick up the phone because they've been hit with a ransomware or denial of service, then we start, you know, having constraints and, you know, significant issues on our operations. The same with water supply. We can't make power without water. We can't make water without power. We can't make power without gas. We can't make gas without power. So you get into this interdependency of where everything, you know, you start hitting those dominoes, you start losing those capabilities, you start having a bad day really, really quickly. Why are our adversaries going after critical infrastructure? Well, if you look at Bianca's report that came out last year, where she laid out, you know, a lot of the highest ransomware payouts, you started seeing a lot of city compromises, city services, those emergency services. They were a prime target for ransomware. You've seen large healthcare organizations as a prime target for ransomware, because, you know, they need those services up and running. You know, we're not going to stop, you know, responding to fires and responding to EMS calls and, you know, shutting down hospitals. We have to have those services. If they don't work, then people die. So they're a prime target for your cyber criminals out there that are just trying to make a buck, and they're going to continue to be. So they also, when you get into the critical infrastructure attacks, you start having physical impacts. You know, if you exceed the safety operations and safety measures on your equipment through, you know, changing parameters through cyber attacks, you can start blowing stuff up. You can start having those physical impacts. You can start having very devastating consequences that can kill people or, you know, permanently disrupt your service for a long time, because a lot of the equipment that we use isn't built in a day. It's generally, you know, very long lead time. So an attack can have very long lasting impacts. And then also, if you start hitting enough critical infrastructure at the same time, or you start hitting those dependencies where, you know, if you hit a gas line or something in the middle of January, you know, not only are you shutting down power, you're shutting down people's heat, because we're running a lot more and more off natural gas. So that starts becoming a significant impact. And when all of that starts happening, you start pushing the system towards that tipping point that we start getting into those anarchy type of situations. So as I spoke, we're going to go through a couple of examples that are a little bit more specific, some real world stuff that's happened. So in 2019, Chattanooga, city of Chattanooga had a primary water pipe burst. It wasn't because of a cyber attack. It was just they were doing some construction. There was a faulty, you know, too much pressure on the pipe or something, and it broke. But it was the primary feed for downtown Chattanooga, and that shut down the city for 3 days. It shut us down because mainly of fire suppression. If you can't have sprinkler systems, then your fire marshal is generally not going to let you occupy the building. So this, you know, forced us to activate all of our backup recovery operations. We had to move a lot of our critical operations to alternate facilities that thankfully weren't across the street, but were on a different water supply in a different facility that was far enough away that we were able to move our critical operations over there and still, keep making power and making everything work and making the transmission grid work. But we learned, pretty quick that we needed to have the capability to send 4,000 or 5,000 people home and work from VPN overnight with little to no notice. So it was a lot of good prep. We did a lot of good, usage of our emergency response processes. So it helped us shore up a lot of our preparedness for things like COVID. So when that happened, we weren't, we have been testing this through drills and exercises, but that was a very good real world example of what we needed to do to be prepared to work virtually. So you also can use this in events like it as starting blocks for your drills and exercises. Change things off of the happy path for how your people would normally respond. Because it's something that's totally out of your control. You can't plan for it. You probably aren't going to know when it happens until the water doesn't turn on. But it's something that changes your perspective and changes your response plan, puts it in that gray area to test something new and different. Another example would be an attack on the gas infrastructure. So this was something that we tested in the electric sector. So we have a national exercise called GridX that's supported by the EISEC, the Electric Sector Information Sharing and Analysis Center. It has cross collaboration amongst all of the major utility providers out there, all of your municipalities and co-ops, 500 to 600 different organizations participating, a lot of government agency support. But what we tested out of that was in GridX 5 was some collaboration with our natural gas providers and pipeline operators. With a significant portion of your electric generation now depending on that natural gas just-in-time supply as a critical fuel, this has become a very dependent thing to make the grid work. So if we start having enough impacts on our gas supply, you can start impacting the reliability of the bulk electric system. You start impacting that, you start having the impacts like you saw with the 2003 blackout in New York. Lights go off for a while, they're not going to come back on for a while because it's not an easy thing to restore that large portion of the grid. So it was things that we needed to start learn. We already knew that we needed to have those conversations, but it just kind of gave us all of the data that we needed to really structure that conversation and understand that our natural gas supply is a critical priority. We need to look at how that supply makes it to the electric sector first, so that we can keep the lights on and at least run everything running that we can. But it was a very good test. It's one of those where it's not the electric sector's ability to control. We have no way of managing the gas infrastructure or the gas providers. We're solely relying on them. So without that collaboration and discussion between us and information sharing, then we have a lot of risk, and that risk can continue to grow as the dependency on natural gas grows. So if you're not in one of these verticals, you might be in one of the other ones. These are just some one-line first domino scenario examples of how to introduce initial chaos into critical infrastructure. They're plausible, and that's another thing that we have to really concern ourselves with. We can't bring fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We have to bring facts. We have to bring data. We have to show how each one of these types of attacks could impact everything else and what will fall next. What will be the downstream impacts. And we do this a lot through drills and exercises, but also learning from the real world examples that happen across the world. Because these attacks, cyber attacks are happening against a lot of critical infrastructure in other countries. You have lots of things going on in Eastern Europe, lots of things that are going on in the Middle East, a lot of things that you have to keep your eye out on and say, okay, let's take this attack that happened against Israel. How would we model that here? Where could that hit us? What can we learn from that? So these are just some, so your ISPs, all being simultaneously hit with an effective cyber attack, effective being the key word, that completely blacks out the internet. Probably an extremely low likelihood, but high impact. And that's generally where these scenarios fall. They're very low likelihood. We have security controls in a lot of these cases, but if they happen, if they get past those controls, they are the big impact types of scenarios. So that would cause a complete internet blackout. So now everything that's running on corporate infrastructure that you don't have independent backbones for, that's, everything that's cloud-based is gone. How much of that, are you dependent on for your critical operations? Can you get your water sites or whatever, or your electric sites to talk if you're running on a Verizon backbone or somebody else's provider backbone? What's your alternative? So it's not, again, something that's not probably in the vertical's direct control, but something that, moves into that gray area of how do you plan for an emergency that's not your fault and it's not something under your oversight, but what is its impacts? The same that we've seen with emergency services dispatch. As I've said, they've been hit with a lot of ransomware. You've seen entire cities their city services shut down. Thankfully, they had a lot of alternatives to fall back on to keep things running, but those are just going to continue to happen. We saw, just this week, the city of Knoxville reportedly got hit by a ransomware, and their city IT services were impacted. So, I mean, that's right up the road for me, and it's really close to home, and, it's still concerning. So then, anyway, you can also look at movies, while they're theatrical and, everything works and they just magically hit buttons on the computer and, they have the widespread impact. I really liked Fight Club. I really liked Die Hard, or Die Harder, the last one, because I had never heard the term firestorm until that movie, which I thought was really interesting. But just, take, what is plausible out of those movies and out of those ideas, and then, structure your chaos plan to account for them, and then see what the impacts are on your organization. Again, we can also talk about the truck and barge transportation. So as we've seen, you have significant supply shortages right now. Well, what would happen, if the next domino to fall in the 2020 game of chaos and Hunger Games that we got going on right now is the truck and barge transportation gets hit. Now I can't get my Amazon delivery and I can't get anything else delivered. And we start having, entire shopping malls and grocery stores and everything have no supply. Then what happens? Then you have people in your operations that are having to determine, okay, am I going to go home and take care of my family, or am I going to go to work? It starts getting into those types of complicated scenarios. Also, our healthcare system is currently, extremely strained with COVID response and everything else that's been delayed as far as preventative care and elective care. What if that got hit with, a heart rate monitor system, malicious worm that went through and destroyed all that? Well, now all of your nurses and doctors are having to go through and do, checks on every patient every 5 to 10 minutes because they're required to, and that's what's keeping that patient alive. And now you've just strained that system even more. So these are the things that, you start lining the dominoes up, and then you start seeing where you fit on that domino chain, and you start having those discussions of, how do I keep these events and these attacks from impacting us? What are we going to do to respond? What are we going to do different when things get worse? Because things can always get worse, but those types of discussions. So if you've never worked in critical infrastructure and have lived in the IT world, there's a few differences that you need to know as far as your incident response goes. One, you probably don't have physical or logical access to these systems. Generally, your OT, your operations technology environment, hopefully is somewhat segmented from your IT environment. You're not running on the same corporate Active Directory server, because that's just bad and just an easy target. It makes it easier for your hackers to jump through the IT infrastructure to get to your OT infrastructure and start doing really bad things on your critical operations. So figure out, where or what access you're going to need, or who you're going to need to support you, to escort you through those sites, explain to you where the assets are, and get you the data that you need to go and do your investigation. There's been lots of posts right now on Twitter from really smart ICS supporters like Joe Solvik from Dragos, a bunch of others. Bring them donuts. As Alyssa said in the keynote, go to where they are, have that discussion, about their operations, about how they do their job, about what they do for work, and then ask them my favorite question: explain to me what your worst day possible here would be if things just went to hell in a handbasket. Talk me through that scenario. Explain to me why things would go bad. Let's take a lot of the controls off the table. What if it doesn't work? What's the backup to the backup? Have those discussions. You'll learn a lot. You'll learn a lot more about how your business operates. And then you also make, some networking connections with a lot of different people in your organization, so that when they do see things going bad, they know to pick up the phone and call you, or call your group, or call the 1-800 hotline, come help me number that you have set up, to come and respond and fight that cyber battle, just like dialing, 911, for all of our physical emergencies. We don't have that generally in the cyberspace. Like if you call your police department right now and said, somebody broke into my house and they stole my file cabinet with all my important data in there, and they are holding it ransom, and they called me and they said that they're going to hold it until I pay them, every police department in the world would know how to respond to that. Every police department will know how to investigate that, and there's lots of laws established, that perpetrator has violated. You move that into the cyber context, you don't have that. You're probably not going to get anybody at your local police department that's going to understand, 1, what you're talking about, 2, how to respond to it, or 3, how to prosecute it. So that's what's, introducing a lot of confusion in this space. We don't have those national trained to us as children process to call the police and get support. There's a big reluctancy in the cyberspace to do that, because we automatically assume, oh my gosh, how did you let this fail? Why did you let this happen? You should have been doing something to protect this, as we've been screaming up and down for years. Hey, I need more money, I need more things, I need more tools, I need more people. Anyway, I digress. But it's something that we have to look at, nationally, and try and come up with a response to. But as you are responding in this space, the one thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is trying to restore operations. As I've said, these are critical things that we depend on to live. The goal is not to spend, weeks trying to come up with the investigation, get attribution on the bad guys, and go hunt and go do all the cool, sexy hacking stuff. The goal is to get the system back up and running. You want to try and preserve evidence. If you can't, okay, get the thing back up and running. Safety is always important in these areas. If you don't have a hard hat and fire retardant clothing and steel-toed boots, and you're going to respond in one of these spaces, go get it. Spend the money. It's not a lot of money, but it prepares you to protect yourself. It prepares you in a lot of cases that stuff is required to even walk through the door. It also, takes you off of the worry list for the people at the site that's having to escort you around, that you're a big fire risk. So as I talked about also, if your IT and ICS cybersecurity groups or support organizations are separated, you got to build bridges. You got to cross-train. You got to communicate. You got to share information. You got to kumbaya hug, whatever you got to do, but you got to work together, because no one group can do this by themselves, no matter how super awesome you think you are. Everybody needs help. Figure out who you need help from, and talk about it, and then start really focusing on drilling together and learning those shared lessons learned. You also have to come up with a priority list. So a lot of what I learned from the infantry was battle tracking, figuring out where my enemy was, what their capabilities were, what they could do next, and then what ground, they had. So we would lay that out on physical maps. We would draw lots of pictures. It'd be like the World War II movie videos thing where you see them scooting tanks around. It was all done with pen and paper, and then they started digitalizing a lot of it. But that's the type of mentality that you need to take when you go into these compromised environments. Okay, they've gotten my HMI or my PLC or my smart relay or whatever they've hacked. How did they get here? What else could they get to? How interconnected are these systems? What connections does this site have to other sites? All of that is things that you have to hopefully know ahead of time. Hopefully you have some asset inventory, some network diagrams, some security controls. You've done the research, you have an operational security plan figured out, but don't expect it. A lot of these groups, their primary mission is to generate or deliver that critical service. Their mission is not to make, IT choices. They don't have that IT lingo. They don't have a lot of those capabilities. So if you're not doing it for them, or you're not helping them to do it, or you're not setting that policy in that direction, don't expect that stuff to be there when you need it. And we're going to talk very briefly about the social disruption barometer. So when you start losing critical infrastructure, bad things happen quickly, or can, depending on where society is at that point. So this was 2 use case examples. So you had the 1977 New York blackout, where based on the conditions of the time, the lights went out, and shortly thereafter you had a bunch of very upset people taking their frustration out on that city. Then you jump to 2003, blacked out for 3 days, no major issues. Things kind of still ran as best they could, but it was just the signs of the times. So based on the way that 2020 has gone for us, I'm pretty sure if we lose anything else, it's going to be a bad day. So it's stressed that importance and that understanding that, the services that critical infrastructure is delivering, people depend on that daily. When the lights go out, people get scared, people die because, America's cardiovascular health is not great. So as soon as somebody has to walk up the stairs, your heart attack rate goes up. So like I said, lights go out, bad day, water goes out, bad day, gas goes out, emergency services, your financial services, Facebook, whatever service that you depend on for your life goes out, it's a bad day and can get really bad really fast. So how do we fix it? My proposal is in line with the current president's cybersecurity strategy, the National Infrastructure Plan of 2013, and the Solarium report. So all of those documents have really good recommendations and outlines and things that we can do to make improvements. The only problem is that we don't have mandates with milestones and action items and assignments to say, this is what we're actually going to do. And this is when, and this is how it's going to get funded. We don't have that. So I propose that we use existing common cybersecurity framework that all critical infrastructure would follow. It should be audited and assessed using the same system. It shouldn't be created by each industry vertical because then you just start building in a lot of regulatory confusion. And you start getting things like NERC-CIP for the electric sector that is very prescriptive as far as times and ways that the controls are implemented. It's not just have a framework and have a control and define how you're going to do that control. It's you're going to patch every 35 days, whether you like it or not. And if you can't, then you're going to have to come up with this documentation path, and it gets confusing very fast. The other thing that we need to do as a community is engage with your cybersecurity team and other groups within your company. So one of the best, I think, successes I've had in my career so far was that I brought our human resources group to our emergency response table in Grid X3. It started a series of discussions of how do we take care of the people as we're taking care of the cyber systems, as we're taking care of the physical response, as we're taking care of the emergency response. How do we make sure that people are getting paid? How do we make sure that we have furlough job codes lined up so that they're not losing, their annual and sick leave because we can't bring them to work? How are we having those discussions to take care of employees' families that might be affected by those emergencies? So having those discussions with people that you normally wouldn't have, that prescriptive, cybersecurity awareness annual training video that everybody has to take, and it's very boring and there's no excitement. Go have real discussions. Talk about, the cybersecurity risk for that team. Talk about what you might need for them and your response. Talk about what their responsibilities are. And then talk about what, you're going to bring them and how you're going to support them when things go bad. Also, engagement with the government, engagement with your vertical partners, engagement across sectors, which we're seeing more and more of today, but I hope that we continue. And then measuring the data within government reports of insecurity. We have lots of reports that say things are bad. They don't say how bad, so it's just always do gooder. That's the same thing I told my privates when I was a sergeant or whatever. They'd come back and they would have jacked things up and everything would have been bad, and I'd just been like, do gooder. Go do push-ups, feel better about yourself, and then go do a better job. So it has to have some starting point, some ground truth of where we're at, what this insecurity is based on a control, not just based on that fear, uncertainty, and doubt of things can go bad, but not telling me specifically what. So smart regulation is not a bad thing. I know a lot of people are scared of regulation or adverse to regulation, but regulation gives you a funding foothold. It can say, here is where we're at on this control. This is the risk that's associated with not having the security control. And it can start funding your security projects and programs and gives you a lot of backing. Most of the electric sector's security efforts are funded under a NERC-CIT flag because we have to meet these regulatory requirements. If we don't, there's significant fines, there's regulatory oversight. We start looking bad as a company or as a sector. So it's the driving force behind a lot of things that make things better. So I recommend the NIST cybersecurity framework. If you're not familiar with NIST, it's been around for a very long time. It's a federal group that puts together a lot of different documents and recommendations. They have a very extensive library that will give you security guidance from IoT or forensics or a whole mess of other things. So Google them, go out there, read their stuff. It's a good place to start with for all of your internal policies. But I recommend this framework for a lot of reasons. Number one reason, it doesn't set times, program constraints, or lock you in to requirements. All of the controls, as you go through them, are organizationally defined frames or organizationally defined measurements. It doesn't say specifically what you should do. So if you don't have a control, implement it. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. You develop your plan of action and milestones and you work towards making improvements. The framework is applied to your major applications and critical functions. So it's done at a system level. You get a lot of good system information as far as the inventory, network makeup, who owns the thing, who runs the thing, and what controls apply specifically to what you would consider a critical part of your business, whether that's a software tool, whether that's the generation control system, whether that's the water control system, whether it's the FAA, control, air traffic control tower, whatever the case may be, you get it at a system level specific plan and assessment. So it pushes you also to have a continuous monitoring program across the whole security spectrum. It's not just focused on one area. So we can get very pigeonholed in security where we look at network monitoring, where we look at incident response, where we look at access control. Whatever that case may be, we get very pigeonholed on our area of responsibility. This framework, really opens you up to say, how can I look at this entire security spectrum for this application? It gives you a solid ground for funding, as I said. So you're looking at it at a control level. So if you don't have the control implemented, when you go to your security assessment report, you figure that out really quickly. You figure out, after doing several of these plans, where the gaps are holistically for your entire operations. You can say, hey, we really don't have any access control measures. We're blind in this space. I need a project. I need a tool specifically to go and do X. Here's, all of these sites that their security is going to be improved for it. And you start making a business value case with measurable data, with stuff that you can show your executives that they understand, because they talk your systems. They talk, your HR management system, your control system, your plant functions. They understand that. They don't understand server 123 and endpoint, Golf Niner, Foxtrot, whatever the case may be on that. They don't speak IT. So you have to take your stuff and put it into a business language for your executives to understand and get your back and go support you when you're competing with other business projects and efforts. But mainly the first outcome that you're going to come out of this doing is you're going to have a process. You're going to realize that a lot of the operations at the sites probably don't have clear processes for how everything works. You have the one person who's been there for 20 years and knows everything and is looking at retirement, and you go and you can get them and you can say, hey, can you write this down? Can you write down how you do, the high level stuff? It pushes towards standardization processes. It also helps you reduce the risk of employee turnover, knowledge transfer. So when you look at how everything's currently regulated, you have the energy sector over here that has NERC-CIP, and we have lots of requirements. And then you have the nuclear reactor groups that have the NRC, and NRC is NIST 853 high controls on steroids. So they have regulatory requirements. And then you get into the water sector, and just recently you had the American Water Act, American Water Infrastructure Act, signed into law in 2018, that required them to have an emergency response plan and a risk management plan for anything that was servicing over 3,000 people. So good start. I mean, good way to get some requirements there. And then you get into healthcare, where everybody thinks you have HIPAA. HIPAA controls privacy to data, and that's about as far as it goes. It doesn't provide any regulatory requirements for system security. It doesn't provide any availability requirements. It doesn't provide, hospitals don't have to maintain inventories beyond what the HIPAA system or what holds HIPAA data. So, I mean, you start, as you go to the right side of the scale of critical infrastructure stuff, you get out of clear cybersecurity guidance requirements. And then the majority of all of your critical sectors are over on the right side of the space that have little to nothing. They have voluntary programs in a lot of cases in the sectors, but even those aren't centrally audited or audited by an outside body. So engagement. Like I said, you need to meet your people, or as Alyssa said, you need to meet them where they live. You need to take them donuts. You need to go there as a student. I want to understand better how you do your stuff so that I can understand better how to secure it. I don't want to come at you with, oh, I got you with a phishing thing. I got you. Yep, I'm good. I got you. No, I want to understand, what are you seeing on a daily basis? What, who do you interact with? What do you need to do to make your business work? What do you need to do do your job? And do I have security controls to protect you? Going with that student mindset, it removes your assumptions, because we automatically assume that people don't care about security. We automatically assume that people don't know, and we automatically assume that they're not doing anything. So once you take that mentality off and you go there and you say, hey, I want to get to know you better, I want to get to know the operation better, you develop a real network within your organization that's security conscious and security focused. So as I said, you need to engage with the government, and we have this wonderful quote from President Reagan from a press conference in 1986 that said, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And in a lot of cases that can be true. However, the government really does want to help. You have a lot of people and a lot of organizations, and a lot of taxpayer dollars that are going towards trying to make things better, that are trying to provide services, that are trying to provide support, that are trying to provide collaboration means to get people talking, get people sharing, and get people engaged with different programs and different things that are being provided. So I know it's scary sometimes, but really try and reach out, get to know people in these organizations, tell them about what you're seeing, have those offline conversations, that aren't informalized documented reports, but you can say, hey, I'm seeing this, on my network or my wire. What are y'all seeing? FBI, DHS, DOE, what else should I be concerned about? You can do that in generally a lot of unclassified space. So, usually everybody's like, I have to have a secret security clearance to go talk to the government. No. You can talk in open source discussions. Not everything is classified, so you don't have to have those requirements to have those discussions. There's a lot of things that are going on that you might not be aware of. FEMA does a lot of community-based training and community-based exercises. You can go and take a lot of their National Incident Management Framework classes. That's how all of your fire departments and government emergency response services are going to show up and structure themselves from a command perspective. So they're going to set up incident commands, they're going to set up operational commands. A lot of this has been demonstrated over the COVID response. So you saw the task forces being stood up. All of that's based under FEMA guidance that we learned after 9/11. So now the government will pretty much respond in the same way. Your fire department, police department, emergency services department, if they show up at your site, that's how they're going to structure themselves, and that's kind of what they're going to be expecting to interface. So having some understanding of how that works will help you not only with your internal response, but also how to interact with those services. There's a lot of groups and coordinating sectors and coordinating councils and other things that are out there. Google your sector, figure out where they're at, talk to the people in your agency or your company. They probably have somebody that knows something about it or attended something. They are doing a lot of good collaborative efforts that are very sector specific. You have information sharing and analysis centers for almost all of these verticals. They're doing a lot of good information and collection and a lot of good collaboration exercises. So I'll plug the EISAC again. If you're in the electric sector, we do GridX every year. It's a great exercise. We learn a lot every time. It's a lot of fun. If you're not in the electric sector, you can still reach out and talk to them and see about observing or seeing about cross-collaboration participation. In the EIS Council, this is a worldwide exercise that's basically a black sky end of days type of drill that's conducted every year. It's very good. It's probably one of the best formatted and structured exercises I've ever seen in my life. They have lots of videos and games and web portal clickable stuff. Very good exercise. I've learned a lot every time I've played. Go check them out. The other thing is communicating. So as I said, you can't expect these organizations to reach out to you. There's a lot more companies than there are agencies or agents. So the best thing and best approach is generally to reach out to them. When you do that, you're bringing them to your table. So if you come to my house for dinner, I'm going to say what we're going to have to eat. I'm also going to steer that conversation. So I don't think companies should be waiting for the government to, push regulatory law requirements. I think that the voluntary sector leadership should really be pushing for standardization. If it's not NIST, something NIST-like, to start defining that data out so that we can get it to those organizations and we can show really where these critical infrastructure verticals are vulnerable and really what programs and support services are needed to make sure that America is protected. And if you're outside of America watching this, reach out to your government organizations. Pretty much every government in the world that I'm aware of is doing something in this space. Canada, I know, does a lot of stuff under the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The European Union is doing a lot of stuff. But you're going to have to steer that conversation yourself. You're going to have to start, sharing data or sharing, what you're seeing. You don't have to get people, you don't have to get the government into your network for them to understand. Like I made the case, if I had somebody break into my house, I don't need a police officer sitting at my front door. I need somebody I can call and say, this happened, please come help me. So a lot of what you've seen in some of those reports, after you've read them, there's some companies are reluctant to allow government to see their data or, put things on their perimeter. That's right, because I don't need a cop, watching my front door. I need, that support when bad things happen. They're going to come and help me and not try and take over and understand that my business operation is the primary response. And we're going to make sure that you get all the data that you can to go, find the bad people and put them in jail. But I need you to come help me, and this is how I need your help. So communicate before bad things happen, because that conversation changes after the bad things happen. Final segment is measurement. So we have all of these reports. They all say we need to do better. They all give lots of ideas on how to do better. But really what we need is all of the political input that the private sector has for these spaces, because all of these verticals make the country run. There's lots of lobbying and other groups that are representing these verticals. We need them to help, reach out to their lawmakers and reach out to people and say, this is what I need from the government. This is how, in your Solarium Commission report, in your National Cybersecurity Strategy, in MIPP 2013, how we would like to collaborate or how we would like to implement this. This is where we think we would get the most effectiveness. We need to get clear measurement across all of critical infrastructure. We do that, as the Donald Sutherland quote, one measurement is worth 1,000 expert opinions. So if I can bring data that is backed up and means something, then I get my point across hopefully a lot faster. So what can you do? From this conference, like every security conference we go to, we'll go there, we'll hear lots of great information, we'll take about 10% back, we'll take it internally, and we probably won't do much with it. I encourage you to take what you were learning here from Alyssa's keynote, from the other talks that are coming up. You have a great lineup after me of very highly technical talks, some more strategic talks, a lot of good concepts, a lot of good things that are going on in the security sector right now. Take that, learn from it, send out the links to your team, send them to the people outside of your cybersecurity team. As I said, if you don't have your operation security plan focused on your critical things that make your company run, probably need to have that. It's going to come up at some point. You're going to need that plan, and having it, after the fact isn't going to help you. And then your disaster recovery plans, drilling exercises, and then personally, I think from COVID we've learned, how to be prepared individually. If you need more help, ready.gov will help you out a lot. One question that I got was, how does America fight back? This is a current policy on that. Not really going to go into it, but that capability, is being developed. But that kind of goes into the company shouldn't hack back because you could set off a war. reach out to your lawmakers, reach out to the FBI, Department of Justice, your local police department, whatever the case may be. Do it the right way. Inform the police and let them take it from there. So for questions, I think we're going to move over to the Discord track 2. If you have anything for me, you can post them up there and I'll respond to them. Again, I'm on the Twitter for the InfoSec discussions. That's where you can find me. I hope you've enjoyed my talk. Really thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And everybody at the Circle City administration and volunteers, really honored to be a part of this conference. It's really meant a lot to me. And thank you all for your support. But with that, I will go ahead and wrap up. So I don't know if my Wrangler is taking over or